Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today, we are with Sara Berns, Executive Director of Discover Pacific Beach. Hi, Sara. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about how women are socializing during the pandemic. This is for a research project to kind of compare how women socialized prior to the start of the pandemic and during, and then hopefully we can consider this an almost after period. So, Sara, just to get started, can you tell me about your background and your organization, the business district that you represent?
So I am the recently former executive director of Discover Pacific Beach. We are the largest business improvement district in San Diego, here in California. We represent a district that is on the coast, in pretty large tourist destination beach, very young population. We have a lot of bars and restaurants that cater to the tourism and kind of college students that tend to migrate to the beach area from our two universities here in San Diego. And yeah, that's sort of PB and myself. And then in general, California, for those of you maybe that aren't familiar, we were shut down like everyone last March, and didn't really have any sort of open outdoor dining until about Memorial Day. Being a beach community, that was huge for us because Memorial Day already is a big weekend, and we basically opened the Thursday before that weekend. So we opened to outdoor dining and 25% occupancy at that point, and then stayed open through summer into early fall. At some point, that 25% indoor occupancy ended and it was outdoor dining only. And then right before Thanksgiving, California was completely shut down again. So we were only allowed takeout dining. And then outdoor dining and entertainment, which had not been allowed since last March, both came back just right before Super Bowl. So it's been about a month since we've been able to go back out to our restaurants and also have some entertainment.
Thank you, Sara. That context is really helpful just because California has experienced some of the strictest public health guidelines compared to the rest of the country. So just keeping that in mind, I was wondering if you could share some of either your experiences firsthand or what you've observed, or even from women that you've talked to. When was the last time you went out to socialize in a hospitality environment and during the pandemic? And what was your experience? What made you feel safe and comfortable, and what didn't?
I am a parent, so I don't socialize too often of a young child right now. But when I do, we definitely were out to eat, family, socializing type family. So since it opened in February, we've gone out a couple times to dinner at restaurants. And then prior to that, had sort of socialized with girlfriends last summer when we were open and able to do that. So fall, probably 2020. And sort of what I've observed, there's pretty strict rules here also, as far as everyone has to be sitting at a table. Alcohol is only served with meals, so there's no bars open unless they actually serve as a restaurant. So things look very different, obviously, around here, especially for our bar community. So you kind of see groups going out that are more selective. I know we've definitely been more selective in who we've hung out with and sort of the friends you hang out with. I've noticed there's really diverse groups of people out because I think people are sort of picking and choosing their socialized groups, and so they seem to be a mixture of everyone.
That was just really helpful. So it sounds like before the pandemic, you were a pretty frequent diner and kind of maybe more family friendly oriented establishments, and then the occasional kind of girls' night out. How often would you say that you actually were, going out to a social environment before the pandemic?
Pre-pandemic, it seems like so long ago. Probably once a month without my family, and couple times a week with my family. We're not big cookers, so we definitely get out to restaurants quite a bit. We were pretty social prior to the pandemic.
What are some of the concerns, or what's kind of going through your head in terms of some of the concerns or barriers for going out now, especially, I'd say being a young woman, but also having a young family? Would you say are the top things kind of going through your head?
I mean, definitely safety and COVID safety. So being a parent, my parents live close by, and they're actually our primary childcare. So we have been, since the beginning of this, very cautious of COVID restrictions because my parents are older, and so we kind of took that responsibility on of having to protect them as well. Although the older generation seemed less concerned about it, so it seemed like it fell on my responsibility, a lot of that. So we've been very COVID conscious since the beginning because of that. I think a lot of my friends are in that situation where they had a quarantine with their parents as well, and look out for their health and safety as well. So that was really a big concern. And then just making sure that when we were going out, that precautions were being taken by the businesses that we did choose to frequent.
I'm curious if you could kind of almost paint a picture for us of when you walked into these establishments, what was your experience? Because, there are different, what we call kind of entry points or gateways of the hospitality experience from the moment you arrive, from the moment you get seated at the table where you're going to be dining. You feel safe, that this was going to be a safe and comfortable environment during this time?
In California, masks were required pretty much immediately everywhere, in San Diego County for sure. So obviously going out, everyone's wearing a mask now. And almost immediately, the businesses were able to adapt to that outdoor dining, which was great for our district. Like I said, we're a Southern California beach district and had very limited outdoor opportunity, surprisingly. And so the businesses were able to adapt so quickly to that. And, we got a parklet program in place with our city. And as soon as that was available, we just saw a ton of businesses taking advantage of that. So obviously the first thing you see is all this outdoor dining. They got very creative in, calling it a beer garden or whatever it may be. So that was awesome to see. And then, most of our businesses were really quick and also really building infrastructure of plexiglass between tables. We saw a huge trend in the restaurant industry of community seating, obviously a few years ago. So you've got a lot of benches and shared seating, and all of a sudden that's completely wrong for the environment. So they were able to build plexiglass dividers and, rearrange seating arrangements so that people could sit 6 feet apart and still maximize their occupancy. So that's something we saw right away, and the businesses be able to adapt to right away. Lines, and so in our community, there's obviously lines. We're, like I said, a beach community, so there was already a big daytime crowd. And so you saw sort of that increase. And as someone that went out more early than everyone else, noticed, that crowd came out a little earlier. And there was also a 10 o'clock curfew on our restaurants right now. So the last entry is at 10 o'clock and everyone has to be gone by 11. So definitely seeing more people out earlier. And managing that outdoor space. So managing the lines to get in, having more security, things like that when you sort of walk up.
Sara, that's a really interesting point you're making. And that's something we're seeing actually in other cities across the country. Is it's almost been this shift from nightlife to almost day life. So do you think that has been true even for the younger generation? Pacific Beach is known as kind of the cool place to go when you're younger, when you're just starting to go out in your 20s and whatnot. So I'm curious if they even kind of followed suit with that trend.
Yeah, that's sort of hard for PBB because Pacific Beach, we're the Sunday fun day place. And the happy hour after work Friday, going down to the beach, grabbing a drink. But you sort of saw that happening Saturdays also, and definitely seeing people out a little earlier. A big concern in our district obviously was house parties because people had to go home at 10 o'clock, and so there was an influx in the house parties. But I still think you saw a lot more people maybe more in that party mindset out in the daytime than normal.
Well, and you mentioned house parties too. So, so speaking of kind of alternative ways that you noticed that women were socializing, did you see any kind of creative ways or heard about some creative ways that women, maybe of different generations, were socializing if they weren't feeling safe to go to a restaurant or hospitality environment?
I did a couple baby showers that we did drive up, or, similar to what everyone was doing, maybe for birthday parties and things, where you did a drive up or something outside, more less exposed. I think people did things in their yards a lot often. That that house party, probably even for people in my age group, definitely increased because you could kind of control the environment a little better. So yeah, I think that's definitely a factor. And trying to think what creative things we did. I think for the businesses, I mean, they came up with all kinds of ideas just to kind of keep people there without the entertainment level. So, we had one business that turned their parking lot into, this beautiful outdoor dining venue, and they did movie nights on the wall of the restaurant. On Thursdays and Friday nights, they would do movies. A lot of trivia nights became a thing more so than before. Just stuff to try to get people interested and keep them sort of staying in the venue a little bit. I mean, I've been so impressed with the business's ability to sort of just pivot into creative ideas. And, a lot of regulations were lifted, as we all know, in the district management. So a lot of creativity and to-go cocktails and trying to be more creative and what do they have that's different. Meals, a lot of online cooking, sort of cooking class / pick your ingredients up here at our restaurant and take it home. I know I was into that stuff. Tequila tasting, so restaurant, you delivered some tequila tasters and you could order food from them. And then on Instagram Live, they did the tequila tasting. So they really got so creative, and hopefully some of that stuff stays.
I love those ideas. So I'm curious because as part of this research project, I've talked to some friends that live in the San Diego area, and they kind of run the gamut of being, kind of open but cautious to very risk averse. What do you think can businesses communicate to some of these more risk averse women who love to go out but are still feeling very nervous? What do you think is going to really help to bring them back?
I think with anything, it's your messaging as a business. I mean, I see social media, I see, we hear things. And so you sort of, for me, I'm looking for the restaurant that shows they're taking precautions, addresses that it's an issue and that they've changed business models to take precautions. And staff is wearing masks the proper way when you walk in. It looks like they're following the rules and regulations. To me, that shows that that's probably happening behind the scenes in the kitchen also and everywhere else if it's happening publicly and in your marketing. So I just think really it's how you're messaging and acknowledging there's a pandemic, and but that the businesses can provide a safe environment to socialize in.
Right now, Pacific Beach obviously has always been this destination for young adults, and I'm curious if you're seeing any changes or differences in who's going out right now, who's not going out. We already talked about kind of the time of day or any other kind of behavior that you've been able to gather about the previous patrons, and whether they've come back, and how busy these businesses are right now.
So, speaking more for Pacific Beach and it being a younger demographic, we really saw those people return quickly. Not to stereotype all of them, but it seemed like the numbers were really high in that 20 to 29-year-old range. We were getting some pretty high numbers out of Pacific Beach, I think, because of that and attracting sort of a younger generation. But with that, I mean, as I mentioned, it was Memorial Day weekend, and our businesses got about 24 hours notice that they could open, and they were bombarded with customers. It wasn't like just a few people came out to test the waters. There were tourists there. They had already planned to come somehow, and so we definitely still saw our normal tourist destination license plates driving around. And so they came back. And I think that speaks a little to the crowd that PB's always attracted. You know, we not just a younger generation, but we also bring people from Arizona, which had been open for about a month prior to California. So a lot of people there were already used to going out and, like I said, booked their plans to come to San Diego. So PB really did see that crowd return. If anything, I think that was harder on our businesses because they were just thrown, here's how you can open and you can do it. And they were so desperate to make sure they could get that crowd in and open, not knowing what the future would be at that point. They did the best they could. And I think a lot of them were able to quickly jump on those regulations, but, you know, not without some problems, of course.
Absolutely. This has been a very tough time for hospitality businesses, especially given those, you know, short notice about reopening and whatnot. So I think it's a testament that Pacific Beach was able to do it safely. So one of the kind of switching gears a little bit, one of the biggest challenges pre-pandemic was the issue of sexual violence and sexual harassment in hospitality and nightlife establishments. And, you know, just taking into consideration, at least in California, that bar environments that don't serve food haven't been able to reopen. Have you heard anything about whether incidents are taking place, you know, whether procedures are a little bit different now? Or I was just wondering if you could comment a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, nothing that is objective that we've gotten stats from our police department or anything like that. But, you know, obviously sexual assault is a big issue in any nightlife environment or, well, in any environment. But, you know, I think our concerns and working with our hospitality group and, you know, we still met monthly and we meet with our law enforcement and ABC every once in a while was more so the environment was more controlled. So that stranger interaction is a little less because you're coming in with your party, you're sitting down with your party. You know, as far as the dating scene, I'm sure that's probably something someone else could speak to was much more difficult, but you're sort of going out with your group of friends. But again, back with that house party. So there was a little more pressure to maybe go back to houses early on because the restaurants closed at 10 o'clock. And so that was concerning, obviously, for law enforcement, that there was a lot of house parties going on and more so than normal. And then you're in an environment that's not monitored. And also something, you know, we've noticed too is in the beginning of this pandemic, not so much now, the availability of rideshare was drastically decreased because there weren't as many drivers willing to drive. And so, you know, having a woman or a person put in a situation where they can't get out of the situation quickly without rideshare available was a concern as well. Did we see that in statistics or numbers? I haven't gotten any of that information, but
I think anecdotally, these are making some really important points. You know, again, especially with the curfew, that one of the unintentional outcomes might be that people are socializing more in private settings. And like you said, that are not necessarily going to be monitored with staff or security or anything like that.
Right.
And then the other point that I think is really interesting is the decrease in rideshare. According to the information and research that I did before the pandemic, rideshare was the #1 most preferred mode of transportation, especially at night for women, because there was concerns about public transit. Again, California is a little bit different because it does tend to be more car centric than other places in the country. But definitely preferred over driving as well as transit. So what are you seeing now? How are women or, you know, patrons getting to Pacific Beach and getting home as well? Or have you seen any sort of increase in impaired driving because of the decrease in rideshare services?
Yeah, so I haven't seen the DUI numbers out of 2020, but you know, it wasn't something that was brought to our attention, which it would be if the numbers really were increased, it's always brought to our attention right away. But yeah, I think rideshare did pick up quickly by summertime, but in that first few months, it was hard. My husband's in the hospitality industry and would often wait 30 minutes for a rideshare to bring him home after getting off work. And so, which wasn't happening prior to that. So it was definitely a couple month period where it wasn't available. And public transportation in the beach area is basically non-existent once 10 o'clock hits. I think all of our buses stop going at 11, and the system's pretty slow as is in the beach area. So, I mean, rideshare has been a huge impact on Pacific Beach and DUIs and all of that. So I imagine there was some consequences for those first couple of months, but it did pick up quickly again because people realized this was their livelihood as well, and they were going to have to get back to work, and the people were there and the demand was there pretty quickly. It's definitely been a change. I think people are still finding a way to socialize. That need has always been there. Even for, like I said, we sort of informally formed all these pods of people you feel safe to socialize with. I think it's important for all ages to be able to still socialize. So that need, I think, was really seen through this, and people's wanting to connect and how creative people got to connect with each other really shows that hospitality is a much needed industry, and we all maybe didn't value it as much as we should have before it was gone. So
very true. Well, thank you so much, Sara. I really appreciate it.